The bus wheels crunched over the gravel as we pulled up to Camp Belly. The place hadn't changed a bit. The same towering pines, the same rustic cabins, even the same creaky dock jutting out over the sparkling lake. A wave of nostalgia hit me like a punch to the gut. It's been 10 years and it still looks the same, I muttered to myself. I clutched my sketchbook tighter, my fingers itching to capture the scene. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The regular American man, not bad by any standards, but the awkward smile on my lips and the occasional hunch of my shoulders docked off all my points. As I stepped off the bus, the sun glared down, forcing me to squint. I scanned the familiar landscape, my heart racing. This place had a decade's worth of memories, most of them tangled up with one person, Francis Holt. I hadn't seen him since that summer a decade ago, but the hurt from our last interaction still stung. "Welcome back, Theo," a chirpy voice interrupted my thoughts. Jenny, the camp director, appeared, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she jogged over. "We're so glad you can join us this summer. How have you been?" Good, I replied, offering a weak smile. "Just been busy with work." She nodded, not really interested in the details. "Great, let's get you settled in. You'll be sharing cabin 5 with another counselor. I'm so in love with the new concept of hiring old campers." I swallowed hard. The last time I'd been in cabin 5, Francis and I had carved our initials into one of the bunks. My stomach churned at the thought. As we approached the cabin, I saw a familiar figure standing on the porch. It was Francis. He looked up and our eyes met. Francis scowled. "Campbell," he said, his voice cold. "Francis," I managed to choke out. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed sawdust. Jenny, oblivious to the tension, beamed at us. "Isn't this great? 2 old friends reunited. I'll leave you to catch up." With that, she skipped off, leaving us alone. I shuffled my feet, unsure of what to say. Francis crossed his arms over his chest. "So, they let you back in," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I winced. "Yeah, they did. How have you been?" "Fantastic. Just living my life. You?" "Same," I lied. We stood there in awkward silence until Francis turned on his heel and pushed the cabin door open. "Let's get this over with." The inside of the cabin was just as I remembered. Francis threw his duffel bag onto the top bunk, the same one where we'd carve our initials. My gaze lingered on the faint etching. "You take the bottom bunk," he said, not bothering to look at me. I nodded, dropping my bag onto the bed. "Francis, Save it," he snapped. "I'm not interested in hearing your excuses. Let's just do our jobs and stay out of each other's way." His words stung, but I couldn't blame him. He probably still thought I had betrayed him, and I'd never had the chance to explain. Maybe this summer would give me that chance. 1 week later. The first week passed in a blur of camp activities. I threw myself into my work, trying to avoid Francis as much as possible. It wasn't easy. We were assigned to the same groups, forced to lead the same activities. It was like some cosmic joke, putting us together at every turn. One afternoon, we were leading a group of campers in a canoeing lesson. The sun was high, glinting off the water, and the kids were laughing and splashing each other. Francis stood at the edge of the dock, barking orders like a drill sergeant. He was good at this, I had to admit. I tried to keep my distance, focusing on helping a little girl who was struggling with her paddle. "You're doing great. Just keep your strokes even," I encouraged her. "Thanks, Theo," she said with a shy smile. I glanced over at Francis, who was demonstrating the correct paddling technique to a group of boys. He caught my eyes and rolled his eyes as if to say, "Can you believe this guy?" I gritted my teeth and turned back to the girl. "Okay, let's try it together. 1, 2, 3, stroke." By the time we finished the lesson, I was exhausted. I trudged back to the cabin, hoping for a few minutes of peace before dinner. But as soon as I walked in, I found Francis already there, toweling off after a shower. His shirt was off, and I couldn't help but notice how his muscles had filled out since we were teenagers. My heart did a little flip-flop. He looked up and caught me staring. Take a picture. It'll last longer, he said, sarcasm dripping from every word. I felt my face heat up. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Whatever. He tossed the towel aside and grabbed a clean shirt. Just stay out of my way, okay? I nodded, feeling like a scolded child. Sure. As he walked past me, he paused for a moment. Why did you come back, Theo? What are you hoping to achieve? I swallowed hard. I wanted to make things right. To explain. Explain? He snorted. It's a little late for that, don't you think? Maybe, I said quietly, but I have to try. He shook his head and walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sank onto the bed, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on me. This was going to be harder than I thought. The next day, we were scheduled for a team-building activity with the campers. It was a classic Trustfall exercise, designed to build camaraderie and break down barriers. I couldn't help but feel a bit of irony in the situation. Trust was something that Francis and I were sorely lacking. We gathered the kids in a circle, explaining the rules. Okay everyone, the idea is to fall back and trust that your partner will catch you, I said, demonstrating with one of the other counselors. The kids giggled nervously but eventually paired up and started the exercise. I watched them, my mind drifting back to the last summer I spent here. Francis and I had done this activity too, back when we trusted each other completely. Campbell! Francis's voice snapped me out of my reverie. Are you going to participate or just stand there daydreaming? I sighed and joined the circle. To my surprise, Francis stepped forward. I'll be your partner, he said, his tone challenging. I swallowed hard. Okay. We faced each other, the tension between us almost palpable. You ready? He asked, his voice low. I nodded, my heart pounding. Ready. I closed my eyes and let myself fall back. For a moment, there was nothing but the sensation of falling, the wind rushing past my ears. Then, strong hands caught me, steadying me. I opened my eyes and looked up at Francis. His face was inches from mine, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he released me, stepping back quickly as if he'd been burned. See? Not so hard, he said, his voice tight. I nodded, my chest tight with a mix of emotions. Yeah, not so hard. I needed to at least explain my side of the story to him. I didn't out him to anyone, at least not intentionally. Still, my heart was doing the tango for some reason. Feeling his touch again made me feel like a man tasting water for the first time after being trapped in the desert. It soothed me and I longed for more. All I wanted to do was apologize and make amends. Later that night, I decided to take a cold shower before bed. The communal bathroom was empty, the tiles cold under my feet. I felt the hot water wash over me, trying to relax. It was hard knowing that Francis was just a few feet away outside the cabin. He was talking rapidly on a call, cigarette in hand. Usually I hated nicotine, but the way the tendrils of smoke wrapped around his silhouette sent butterflies free in my stomach. I turned off the water and reached for my towel, only to realize I'd forgotten it in the cabin. I wrapped my arms around myself and peeked out the door. The coast was clear. I quickly made a plan. Run out, grab towel, slip into a pair of shorts immediately. I darted down the hall, praying I wouldn't run into Francis. As I rounded the corner, I collided with a solid, warm body. I yelped, slipping on the wet floor. My body tensed, ready for the fall, but a pair of strong arms wrapped around my damp skin. Whoa, careful there. I looked up, my face burning. Thanks, I forgot my towel. Francis smirked, his eyes flicking down to my bare chest. Seems like it. I tried to pull away, but he held me for a moment longer, his grip firm. You always were a klutz, Campbell. I laughed nervously. Yeah, some things never change. He let me go, his expression softening for a moment. Maybe not everything has to. Look, Francis, about what happened back then. He held up a hand, cutting me off. Not now, Theo. Not here. His voice was strained, as if he was holding back a flood of emotions. I nodded. Okay, but we do need to talk about it. Yeah, maybe we do. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, dripping and conflicted. I turned back to the cabin, grabbed my towel, and dried off. By the time I crawled into bed, Francis was already in his bunk, his back to me. Good night, Francis, I said softly, not really expecting a response. There was a long pause, and then he sighed. Good night, Theo. It wasn't much, but it was something. 2 days later, the campers were busy with their tie-dye projects. A rainbow of colors splattered across the tables and their clothes. I was trying to explain the importance of wearing gloves when I noticed Francis across the room, his attention focused on a group of boys struggling with their designs. Hey, Theo? Called out Emily, one of the younger campers. Can you help me with my shirt? Sure thing, I said, moving to her side. As I reached over to adjust her shirt, I saw Francis watching me out of the corner of his eye. Looks good, Emily. Just twist it a bit tighter and you'll get those nice rings, I said, giving her a reassuring smile. Out of nowhere, Mike, one of the campers from my platoon, decided to use Francis's canvas. He ran over to Francis's side and splattered him with a handful of bright blue dye. Mike! Francis yelled, his voice full of frustration. What the hell are you doing? Mike's eyes widened in shock, and he stammered an apology, but the damage was done. Francis stormed over to me, his face flushed with anger. Why didn't you stop him, Theo? He demanded. You were right there. I blinked, taken aback by his sudden outburst. I was helping Emily. I didn't see... Convenient, he snapped, wiping at the dye but only managing to smear it more. It's always convenient for you, isn't it? I felt my own temper rising. I came here to find peace, and when I met him here, I decided to make amends. But he has been nothing but a wet blanket. What's that supposed to mean? He glared at me, his eyes flashing. You always seem to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe if you paid more attention to the kids instead of daydreaming, this wouldn't have happened. The campers around us fell silent, watching the exchange with wide eyes. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my voice steady. I'm doing my best, Francis. Maybe if you weren't so quick to judge. Judge? He cut me off, his voice rising. I wouldn't have to judge you if you would just do your damn job instead of hovering over me with an apology I don't want to listen to. The words stung, and I felt the old wounds opening up again. Fine, I said, my voice tight. You want me out of your way? Done. I turned and walked out of the pavilion, ignoring the whispers and stares. I needed air, space, anything to clear my mind. The gloomy clouds over my head were a reflection of my mood. I returned to our room and pulled my duvet over my head with a huff. Stupid, insufferable, annoying, good-looking, sexy... Ugh! I groaned in exasperation. I couldn't even hate him. Belly full of anger, I drifted to sleep. What felt like seconds later, the loud pitter-patter of rain pounded against the cabin roof like a drumbeat, pulling me out of my sleep. I huddled under the blankets, my heart racing with each flash of lightning and each crash of thunder that shook the walls. Hey, Theo. Francis's voice cut through the darkness, his tone soft and soothing. You okay? When did he enter? I nodded, not trusting my voice to speak. I hated storms, always had. Without a word, Francis slid into my bunk, his warm body pressing against mine as he wrapped his arms around me from behind. I stiffened at the unexpected touch, but before I could protest, he pulled me close. His chest against my back, breath warm against my neck. It's okay, Theo, he murmured, his lips brushing against my ear. I'm here. You're safe. I closed my eyes. I know. We laid there in silence for a moment. Just as I was about to lose myself to the fear, Francis spoke again. Do you remember that night? He asked softly, his voice tinged with sadness. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. How could I forget the night he was referring to? It had rained really hard, and just like tonight, Francis held on to me for comfort. Back then, We were just two kids trying to survive summer camp. I was an outcast and he was my roommate. The storm had been terrifying to me, and as the winds howled and the rain pelted down, Francis had taken my hand. "We're going to be okay," he had said, his voice firm despite the tremor in it. "Just stay close." It was during that night, as the storm raged on, that Francis had opened up to me in a way he never had before. "Theo," he had whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "There's something I need to tell you." I knew he was doing this to comfort me. I turned to him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What is it, Francis?" He had taken a deep breath, his hand squeezing mine tightly. "I'm gay." His words had hung in the air between us, mingling with the sound of the rain. I stared at him, my mind racing. Francis was gay? How? He was the macho kid that protected me from bullies at camp. The one girls whispered about in the laundry room. He was gay? Those questions swirled in my head, but it was the moment that everything changed between us. Francis had just come out to me, and our friendship had shifted into something more. I had always been attracted to him since he stood up for me in camp, but knowing his sexuality validated me, I actually stood a chance. Slowly, his snores soon filled my ears, covering the storm, but I couldn't hear anything else. A loud crash of thunder illuminated the room, chasing away my memories from a decade ago. In response to his question now, I replied, "I remember. Simpler times. You shocked me to death when you came out to me." Francis sighed, his breath warm against my skin. "I did, only to find out the next day that everyone at camp knows I'm gay." I stared at him, shock mingling with guilt. "I can explain." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "I only told you, Theo. I trusted you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd never told anyone. I knew that much. But it was complicated. "I didn't tell anyone, Francis. I swear." He looked away, pain etched into his features. "I felt like a freak show or something." I reached out, cupping his face in my hands. "You're not a freak, Francis. You're amazing, and everyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." Tears glistened in his eyes, and he leaned into my touch. "I felt so betrayed, so alone. I had to leave the camp." That was all I needed to hear. Without another word, I leaned in and kissed him, pouring all my fear and longing into the press of our lips. It was soft at first, like we were both afraid to break the spell of the moment. But as the kiss deepened, so did the emotions, until it felt like we were drowning in them. When we finally broke apart, breathless and flustered, I rested my forehead against his, our breath mingling in the cool night air. "Wow," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that lit up his face. There was still so much left unsaid, yet we fell asleep together, wrapped in each other's arms. The storm still raged outside. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of shouting. I bolted upright, my heart racing. Francis was already out of bed, pulling out his shoes. "What's going on?" I asked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Sounds like trouble in the bonfire pit," he said grimly. "Come on." We rushed outside. A crowd of campers had gathered around the pit where a young redhead was shouting at his friend. The boy's face was flushed with anger, tears streaming down his cheeks. "You're the one who told everyone! Jake! I trusted you!" he yelled. Jake, a tall, lanky kid, looked equally upset. "I didn't say anything! Timmy, I swear!" Francis and I exchanged a look. This felt all too familiar. "Break it up, guys," Francis said, stepping forward. "What's going on here?" Timmy turned to us, his eyes blazing. "He outed me! He told everyone I'm gay!" Jake shook his head vehemently. "I didn't! I would never do that!" The other campers watched, whispering among themselves. I felt a pang of sympathy for Timmy. This was exactly what had happened to Francis all those years ago. "Okay, everyone, let's calm down," I said, trying to defuse the situation. "Timmy, why don't you come with us for a minute?" Timmy glared at Jake one last time before following us away from the crowd. We led him to a quiet spot by the lake, where he sank into the bench, burying his face in his hands. "Timmy, we're here to help," Francis said gently. "Can you tell us what happened?" Timmy sniffled, looking up at us with red-rimmed eyes. "I thought Jake was my friend. I told him I was gay, and now everyone knows. I feel so betrayed." Francis knelt down beside him, his expression softening. "I understand how you feel, Timmy. Something similar happened to me when I was your age." Timmy's eyes widened. "Really?" Francis nodded. "Yeah, and it hurt, but I want you to know that it gets better. There are people who will accept you for who you are." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Timmy, I was there when it happened to Francis, and I never outed him. I would never do that to anyone. I don't think Jake would do that to you either." Francis looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. "Why should I believe you?" I swallowed hard. I can't be throwing stones in my glass house. There was a long, heavy silence. Timmy gasped dramatically. "You mean you both?" I nodded. "Yeah, that aside, think back on it. Was anyone else there when you told Jake?" His bunkmate, Donnie, but he was asleep, I think." "Oh my God, I shouldn't have accused Jake," Jimmy wailed. Francis stood up, his expression unreadable. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned to Timmy. "Timmy, it's okay to be scared, but you don't have to go through this alone." Timmy nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. "Thanks, Francis. Thanks, Theo." That night, after the campers had gone to bed, Francis and I had sat by the lake, the moonlight reflecting off the water. "I never wanted to hurt you, Francis," I said quietly, breaking the silence. "The boys at camp were just too naughty. We had an activity where we had to share handwritten poems." Francis nodded to show that he was listening. "My platoon also did something similar." "Yeah, I wrote my poem and folded it up." I paused, wondering if I wanted to tell him. "I also started writing a love letter confessing my crush on sexuality." "To whom?" My skin burned all the way down to my neck. "You." "How did the outed person end up being me?" Francis asked in disbelief. "I accidentally submitted the love letter instead of my poem. I actually outed you, but it wasn't intentional at all." Francis sighed, staring out at the lake. "Bloody hell, why didn't you tell me?" "I was scared," I admitted. "Scared of what people would think if I openly sided with you. Scared of losing you as a friend if I said that it was my note that caused everything. And in the end, I lost you anyway." He turned to look at me, his expression softening. "I was scared too." I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not alone, Francis. You never were. You still aren't." "You should have told me something. You had me thinking I was seducing a straight dude. I tried so desperately then." He squeezed back, a small smile playing on his lips. "I was everything but straight. I knew I had a little crush on you." He leaned his forehead against mine and whispered, "Is it still little?" I shook my head so hard that it rattled against his. "There's an expansion problem. I'm afraid that the word little will have to retire." Francis's lips widened with a wide smile as he pressed them against mine, warm and sweet. We sat there for a long time, holding hands and watching the moonlight dance on the water. For the first time in 10 years, I felt a sense of peace. 2 days later, Timmy made peace with Jake and they sorted their problems. I was proud of them. They didn't allow it to ruin their friendship. The mess hall was buzzing with chatter as the campers and counselors gathered for lunch. I was at the salad bar, trying to decide between ranch and Italian dressing, when I overheard a group of counselors at the next table. "Did you hear about Francis and Theo?" one of them whispered. "I heard they are a thing." I froze, my hand hovering over the salad dressing. "No way," another counselor replied. "I thought they hated each other." "That's what makes it juicy," the first one said with a smirk. "All that tension? Totally unresolved feelings." I felt my face heat up, and I quickly grabbed my plate, making my way to the farthest corner of the room. The seat wasn't even warm yet before one of the kids walked up to me. "Miss Jenny asked me to call you, Sir Theo." I left the hall and went towards the office in confusion. What did she want? I walked in, wondering what could possibly have gone wrong now. "Theo, we need to talk," she said, her voice unusually grave. "Timmy's mother is here, and she's not happy." My stomach dropped. What happened? Jenny sighed, rubbing her temples. She found out about the incident at the bonfire, and she wants to speak with both Francis and you. I nodded, feeling a sense of dread. "Okay, let's get this over with." We walked into the small office where Timmy's mother, Mrs. Johnson, was waiting. She was a tall, imposing woman. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Theo Campbell." Jenny introduced me. He was there when the incident happened. Mrs. Johnson turned her sharp gaze on me, and I felt like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Mr. Campbell, I want to know what you're doing to protect my son." I took a deep breath. "Mrs. Johnson, we take bullying very seriously here. We're doing everything we can to ensure Timmy feels safe and supported. Yet I'm hearing the most outrageous rumor, that he's gay," she said, her voice rising at the gay word. "How could you let this happen?" Before I could respond, Francis walked in, his expression grim. "Mrs. Johnson, I understand your frustration. We both do. We're doing our best to make sure Timmy feels safe in his sexuality." She turned her eerie on him. "And who are you?" "Francis Holt. I'm another counselor here. I was also present during the incident." Mrs. Johnson's eyes narrowed. "I've heard about you too. People are talking about how you're involved." Francis stiffened, his jaw tightening. "Our personal lives have nothing to do with this, Mrs. Johnson. We're here to support Timmy." She pressed on, her tone accusatory. "I don't want my son to be influenced by whatever it is you two have going on." I stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "Mrs. Johnson, our focus is on Timmy's well-being. Whatever rumors are circulating, they didn't change our dedication to our campers." Francis nodded in agreement. "Timmy's safety and happiness are our top priorities. We'll do whatever it takes to make sure he feels supported." Mrs. Johnson seemed to soften slightly. After a few more minutes of conversation, Mrs. Johnson seemed satisfied and left the office. "That could have gone worse," Francis muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, but it still wasn't great," I replied. "We need to be more careful." He nodded, his expression serious. "Agreed. Let's keep our focus on the campers and try to avoid any more distractions until camp is over." I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Our personal lives had become a lightning rod for controversy. The next day, the camp was busy with the usual activities, but Francis and I had managed to slip away unnoticed. The supply closet was cluttered with boxes of arts and crafts supplies. "Could this place be any more cliche?" Francis whispered, his breath warm against my ear as we squeezed into the tight space. "I think the mess adds to the charm," I replied, stifling a laugh. "Very forbidden romance in a janitor's closet vibe." We both chuckled, the tension from the day easing slightly. I leaned in closer, our shadows brushing, and felt the familiar flutter of my stomach. "Shh," Francis said, putting a finger to his lips. "We can't get caught again." "Right," I whispered back, but it was hard to stay quiet when his presence was so intoxicating. As we shared a brief stolen kiss, the sound of approaching footsteps made us freeze. The closet door handle rattled. "Oh no," I mouthed. "Did someone leave a box of paintbrushes in here?" A voice called out. It was Jenny. Francis and I exchanged a look. There was no way out but forward. and we were definitely about to get caught. "I think it's in the bag," another voice said. Francis grabbed a random box, and we both tried to look busy. The door creaked open, and Jenny peeked in. "Oh, there you are," she said, looking surprised but not suspicious. "We need those paintbrushes for the afternoon activity." "Sure thing," Francis said, his voice a perfect picture of calm. He handed her the box, and she gave us a nod before closing the door again. As soon as the coast was clear, we burst into silent laughter, relief flooding through us. "That was too close," I said, still grinning. "Way too close," Francis agreed, but his eyes twinkled with mischief. "We should be more careful next time." "Agreed," I said, though secretly, I was already looking forward to our next stolen moment. 2 weeks later. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of camp activities, shared laughs, and stolen moments. Francis and I grew closer, the old wounds slowly healing. One evening, we found ourselves alone in the cabin, the other counselors out for a late-night swim. Francis was sitting on his bunk, sketching in his notebook. I watched him for a moment, feeling a surge of affection. "What you drawing?" I asked, leaning over to get a better look. He glanced up, a shy smile on his face. "Just doodling." I raised an eyebrow. "Can I see?" He hesitated for a moment, then handed me the notebook. I flipped through the pages, my heart skipping a beat as I recognized the odd sketches. Technique could use some work though, but I could recognize the images. They were of us, sitting by the lake, laughing with the campers, even the moment we shared our first kiss. "These are amazing, Francis," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "You're really talented." He shrugged, looking embarrassed. "Thanks." I set the notebook aside and took his hand. "Francis, I want to be with you. For real, not just for the summer." He looked up, his eyes shining with emotion. "Me too, Theo. But what about after camp?" "I'll come to New York on weekends," I said without hesitation, "and we can figure it out from there. I don't want to lose you again." He smiled, his grip tightening on my hand. "I don't want to lose you either." As the last days of summer approached, the air was filled with a bittersweet feeling. The campers were getting ready to go home, and so were we. But this time, things felt different. There was hope, a promise of something more. On the last night, we gathered around the bonfire, the flames casting flickering shadows on our faces. The campers sang songs and roasted marshmallows, their laughter echoing in the night. Francis and I sat side by side, our fingers intertwined. It felt right, like we were finally where we were meant to be. "I can't believe it's over," I said softly, resting my head on his shoulder. He kissed the top of my head. "It's not over, Theo. It's just the beginning." As the fire crackled and the stars shone above us, I knew he was right. We had found our way back to each other, and this time, we weren't letting go. 1 month later, exactly a month later, I stood in my small studio apartment in Maine, packing a bag for my weekend trip to New York. My heart was light, a smile playing on my lips. The phone rang, and I answered it, recognizing Francis's number. "Hey, you." "Hey, yourself," he replied, his voice warm and familiar. "Ready for the weekend?" "Always," I said, feeling a rush of excitement. "I can't wait to see you." "Me too," he said softly. "I've got a surprise for you." "Oh? What kind of surprise?" "You'll see," he teased. "Just hurry up and get here." I laughed, feeling happier than I had in years. On my way. As I locked up and headed out, I couldn't help but feel grateful for that summer at Camp Belly. It had given us a second chance, and this time, we were making the most of it. Love had found its way back to us, and this time, we were ready. Camp Belly reached out to us again the next summer. Francis and I were in the middle of house hunting. I'd more or less moved into his place. My job could be done from anywhere, but Francis's engineering firm was permanent. Although it meant moving away from my family, it was a compromise I was willing to make. Francis was all too happy to accept the invite from Camp Belly. It was time for summer to work its magic again. The end. How long is too long when it comes to love? Thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and feel free to go and check out our Ko-Fi page. Stay wholesome.